You're good to go, Digby.
I am indeed also.
Good. All right, let's go for it. My name's Kevin Buck. I'm the Chief Executive of the Jazz Centre UK. And we're here in the Jazz Centre UK today, based in this wonderful city of Southend, with the legendary Digby Fairweather, musician, broadcaster and author. And before we get started, I should just explain, Digby, for those watching, that you're not being some sort of prima donna rock star. You do have a bit of an eye issue that requires you to wear the sunglasses.
That's right, that's right, that's all.
So I'm certain for those watching that you need absolutely no introduction whatsoever, but for the benefit of some, I will. Now, they do say you should never read your own Wikipedia page. However, I read yours, and your Wikipedia says, before becoming a professional musician, Fairweather was a librarian and has since retained an interest in jazz bibliography and archiving.
True.
He led his first band, Diggs Half Dozen, in 1971 and recorded in 1973 with Alex Welsh. 4 years later, he was a member of the band Velvet with Ike Isaacs, Len Skeet and Denny Wright. And after that, a member of the Midnight Follies Orchestra and the Pizza Express All-Stars. In the early 1980s, he started a band that performed in music by Nat Gunella, hope I pronounced that right.
You did?
He worked as a sideman for George Chisholm, Alex Welsh, Tiny Winters and Brian Priestley. In the 1980s and 1990s, he led the Jazz Super Kings, the Great British Jazz Band and the Half Dozen. During the 1990s, he was part of the Salute to Satchmo. Fairweather founded the Jazz College charity with Stan Barker to introduce improvisation into schools. He established the Association of British Jazz Musicians, the Jazz Centre UK, which is where we are today, and the National Jazz Archive just up the road in Loughton.
Yes, that's right.
He also wrote Jazz, the Essential Companion, 1987, with Brian Priestley and Ian Carr. In 2000, the book was renamed The Rough Guide to Jazz. Apart from his playing and group leading, Fairweather has long pursued a parallel career as a jazz broadcaster and writer. From 1985 to 1988, he worked and recorded with Brian Priestley's Special Septet and Tony Milner's Mingus Music and wrote the book How to Play Trumpet. By 1990, he embarked on a dual vocation as broadcaster for BFBS.
That's right.
We're nearly there. The BBC
Well
World Service, Jazz FM and BBC Radios 2 and 3, including occasionally deputising for the great Humphrey Lyttelton on his show Best of Jazz, successfully presenting Jazz Parade and Jazz Notes. In 2016, Fairweather founded the Jazz Centre UK, a registered charity whose aims are to promote, preserve and celebrate the culture of jazz in all its forms. Your awards and honours, Mr. Fairweather, are Musician of the Year, BBC Jazz Society 1979, Freedom of the City of London 1992, British Jazz Award Trumpet 1992, the Benno Horseman Award, Cork Festival Jazz 1993, Freedom of Southend Millennium Roll of Honour 2000, Top Small Group Digby's Half Dozen British Jazz Awards 2005, 2006, 2008, 2015, Lifetime Achievement Awards for Service to Jazz, Worshipful Company of Musicians of London 2013, and Services to the British Jazz Awards 2015. Have I left anything out?
No, you've just about covered the whole thing, my dear friend.
Great.
The whole thing, yeah. It's been a long time.
What a remarkable career and a remarkable achievement, really. So my first question to Digby, really, then, what was the genesis moment in jazz for you? Where did it all begin?
Well, my dear Kevin, it's a long time ago. It was about 1952, can you believe, when I was 6 years old. I'm a boomer, 1946. And I heard on the radio a band led by a wonderful clarinet player called Sid Phillips. And Sid was famous in Britain at that time. And remember, this is prior to rock and roll. Rock and roll didn't exist then. And I heard this wonderful band and I thought, wow, that's for me. And I was probably about, well, I would say 5 or 6. And it just clicked with me.
As early as that?
Yeah. And I got into jazz very quickly because in those days, there was no TV to speak of, but there was a lot of jazz on the radio. So I used to pursue the jazz programs on what was then the Light program. And I heard, oh gosh, I heard Ted Heath's great band every Saturday morning playing live. I got to know the man who would later be Sir John Dankworth with his orchestra when I was about 6. And when I was 8, I remember writing to my preferred comic, which was The Lion. You know, the Lion and the Tiger were two comics. And I joined the Lion Club, which you really did just by reading The Lion. And when I was 8, I had a picture of myself playing a little homemade drum kit. And I cited my 2 favorite bands as Ted Heath and Johnny Dankworth, which wasn't bad for an 8-year-old, I suppose. And then I got completely embroiled in jazz from then on. When I was 11, my dad, John Fairweather, found us a wonderful house on the Essex marshes. It's called Stanitz, and he bought it for £1,350 and converted it back from 2 workmen's cottages into a single house. So there I was at the age of 11 on the Essex marshes, no brother or sister, hated school of any sort. So I became really a bit of a spoilt boy, I think. I was allowed to listen to music from my earliest years with my dad to begin with, because he loved classical music and he introduced me to classical music. So I had this very isolated childhood in a way, but a very special one, where music was all around me. My mother played ragtime piano very well. My dad was a cellist and a pianist.
All right, so you grew up in a musical house?
Oh, I did, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. My dad had this great big oak cabinet full of 78s. 78s, for people who don't remember them, were actually 78 recordings that played for 3 or 4 minutes. Or if you had the 12-inch variety, which was for classical music, they played for about 5 minutes. And my dad had this enormous collection, and he said, dip into it, Digby, see what you think.
So he was initially encouraging then, your father?
Oh yes, yes, he was great.
And your mother?
And my mum, they were lovely.
Yeah.
And my dad in particular, you know, we used to sit on the sofa together and listen to all kinds of classical music. I remember one was Belshazzar's Feast by William Walton. And we would sit there and listen to that, you know. And also he gave me the run of his 78s, because round about that time LPs, vinyl, started coming in, which were different. So he said, well, you can have the run of the 78s, which were less valuable. So I got to know an awful lot about classical music in my early years, until I got the bug for jazz.
Right. So, and you obviously got the bug for jazz. So,
yes, I did.
And it's clearly from an early age, as you've said. I mean, you know, from single-digit years. I mean,
totally. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think the influence of the music in the household probably had an effect or an impact on that?
Certainly, certainly. The only thing was, with my beautiful parents, Ina and John, my father, before the war, was a semi-professional orchestral conductor. He conducted local musicals like No No Nanette and Rio Rita, which were popular, and he played cello and piano, and taught the cello and the piano at the Metropolitan School of Music in Southend. Oh. But after the war, because he was drawn into the MP, the military police, he more or less turned out to be a listener. And I don't think he ever really felt, and neither did my mum, that music was a way you could make a living. It was really for, I suppose, for fun, in a way, you know.
And was jazz itself played much in the household when you were
not to begin with. But I remember, this wasn't jazz, of course, but I remember buying Rock Around the Clock in 1954, thumping away on my little drum kit to it, you know. And I remember my dad's look of, excuse me please, of horror when he heard this thumping away and this stuff. And that's when we started, I suppose, to grow apart a little. My father, who was a very intelligent man and with a lot of experience of music, including Thomas Beecham, who he adored. He followed the saga of Beecham and Delius all the way through the 20s and 30s. And when I got interested in jazz, he felt that was a step down, you know, which it was in a way. I mean, you know, if you listen to Delius, which I adore now, it's great stuff, you know. But my dad thought it was, jazz was a come down. So we started to quarrel.
Oh, right. Well, that probably leads us on then, you know, to really, you know, you've been inspired, and you know you clearly had an ear for jazz. So sort of tell us then about your sort of route into professional jazz, to becoming a musician, and really, you know, you've alluded to how your parents felt, or certainly possibly your father felt about that.
Absolutely, yes, yes. Well, the way it happened was, my father started me on violin because he thought that would be a nice classical instrument. But there aren't many jazz violinists. So he bought me a clarinet, which I learned to play. And there was a lot of jazz clarinet players back then. People like Benny Goodman, later Ackerbilk. And so it was a very jazzy instrument. But I had a secret desire very early on for the trumpet. When I was 10 years old, there was a wonderful jazz shop. Well, it wasn't a jazz shop, it was a junk shop, really. But they had an alto horn. And the alto horn is the one you play under your arm like that, with 3 valves. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, how do you make all that music from 3 buttons being pressed down? And so I learned the alto horn. And then a neighbor of mine called Fred Walker said to my mum one day when we were in the pub at Pegosham, which is where my house was, he said, I've got an old trumpet at home. And I went, have you? And I said to my mum, ask him if I can borrow it. And he said, yes. And I spent the next week in a fever of excitement at the thought of this marvellous instrument coming. And next Sunday, there we were at the Plough and Sale, and there was Fred with the case. And I never forgot opening the case and seeing the trumpet for the first time. It was fantastic. And because I'd played the alto horn, which was the same fingering, when I was a bit younger, by the time we got home to Stanitz, which was my house, down the old cart track in the deep countryside, I could play When the Saints Go Marching In. Ba-ba-ba-da, ba-ba-ba-da, do-do-do-do-do-do-do-da. Yeah.
And what sort of age would you have been then?
12.
All right.
12,
so,
yeah.
Still from a very young age.
Yeah. So, but to answer your question, the way I got into professional jazz was very slow. I started off playing the clarinet and alto sax and trumpet in the local jazz club for fun. And I always dreamed about being a professional musician. But in those days, if you went to a careers convention at somewhere like Southend High School, which was my school, there was no music cubicle. You couldn't go in and say, I want to be a musician. They didn't know what that was. They knew about the civil service or librarianship, which is what I became. I took 2 years doing college in Ealing and got the ALA qualification in librarianship. But all that time, from the age of 19, when I was 1965, I discovered that I could play the trumpet very well indeed, something set in my embouchure. And I was a staggeringly good trumpet player, though I say myself. I could play the entire...
Well, I think your awards say so as well,
Well, yeah. But, you know, it was funny. I couldn't, in those days, make a mistake on the trumpet if I tried. So, to answer your question again, I started playing in dance bands locally and with local musicians. But I had this very big ambition about going further. So one day, in about 1972, I discovered a lot of very, excuse my cough, a very good set of musicians. I can name them. Cy Laurie, Hugh Rainey, Iggy Leigh, Terry Pitts. They were all graduates of the trad boom which preceded the Beatles. And they'd started working in a pub in Basildon called the forgotten the name of it, doesn't matter. Anyway, they played that. And they were professionals. So I thought, well, gosh, if I can get to play with them, I'm starting to make my first toe on the rack of the staircase of success, you know.
And what sort of age would you have been at this sort of time?
I was, well, 22, maybe 23.
20s,
And I worked with these guys who were nationally known at one point, and they were very kind to me. And they put me in touch with different people who they'd worked with and said, it's a good young trumpet player, you should use him. And gradually I got to the stage by about 1975 when I was stamping books in the day. That's due back on the 13th of April, sir, yes.
Well, of course, you was a librarian at this time.
I was. I took the ALA qualification in Ealing and qualified as a librarian. And ended up running the music and arts in this very building, actually. If you and I could wander up those two staircases, we'd be in the department that I ran.
Well, it's come full circle.
It absolutely has, absolutely has, yeah. And it went on and it got better and better. And I had lots and lots of extreme good luck in my early career. One of them was meeting the great Alex Welsh, who had a wondrous, wondrous band, the best of its time in the day. And I heard Alex playing in 1968, and my band played the support to him at London's home of traditional jazz, which was the 100 Club at 100 Oxford Street. I managed to get a job there, and I said to the owner, who are we supporting? Because we were a support band, you know. He said, oh, it's Alex. Ah, Alex Welsh, my favourite band. So I did the gig, and Alex came over, and he was a Scotsman, a delightful, delightful Scotsman, died much too young. And he came over and put his arm around me, and he was very gracious. And he said, this is the best young band I've heard, and you're the best young trumpet player I know. And from then on, he did everything for me. I played my first album with his band. I substituted for Alex when he was getting sick, because he died at 52.
Quite young.
It was, yeah.
But having that sort of peer support from fellow musicians was
fantastic. It was like joining the Beatles for me, you know. And on that night, all of Alex Welsh's musicians, who are in jazz terms, they were household names, Johnny Barnes, Roy Williams, and they liked me. And immediately, I was part of their circle.
Very good.
And I got to know a lot of other people as well, so, you know.
But okay, so, and before we sort of move on to other parts of your career then,
Yes,
and we'd alluded to it a bit earlier, but really you're, and I think you've touched on an important point that possibly even today some people see learning music as a lifestyle kind of thing rather than an actual professional career.
Oh,
although it's much,
definitely.
You know, there are some attitudes like that still exist today, but
Yes.
you know, you've alluded to it with, I think particularly your father, that how he felt about you actually leaving a, you know, what's probably a good, steady, well-paid or reasonably well-paid job, certainly a steady job, and going out on the road and becoming a musician. So, you know, tell us a bit about that. And
well, he actually, I don't think this is the right word, but I have a very lovely Jewish friend who uses the word Shiva. And as I understand, that's rejection from the house. So when I said to my dad, and I was playing all over the country, really, you know, by that time, I'm thinking of doing it for a living. He said, if you do that, you will not get my support, you can't come home and ask for money, and you're on your own, which was pretty tough.
it was quite a tough thing for
a father
someone to hear from their parents.
Yes, it was. And I actually think, not departing from, I think one of the things that you've achieved with your wonderful family is you have a brilliant guitar playing daughter and you have a brilliant drummer for a son. And I think one of the great blessings you've given them is your unqualified approval, You've helped them get the instruments they want. And that's a huge blessing.
Oh, thank
And
you.
all the way through my career, I always had a slight sense of guilt, because I thought, you're not doing what your grandmother wanted, you're not doing what your grandpa wanted, or your mum. My mum was a sweetie. She used to say, well, you must do what you feel you must do. But she never said, go out and do it, you're the best thing since sliced bread.
But do you think deep down at some point through your career before you lost your father, do you
Yes.
think he was proud? Do you think he was proud of what you achieved and what you became?
Sadly not.
Really?
No, I think, unfortunately, my mother and I were very close. She was very proud of her trumpet playing son. She went everywhere with me. And I've always had a secret feeling of guilt that my father really wasn't much involved in that. He never came to any shows. He was very reluctant to even talk about the relative degree of success that I'd had. And that was very sad. That's something I'd very much like to have corrected. Because towards the end of his life, we did at least agree that the qualities of music are the same. It's an oversimplification to say there's only good music or bad music. That's too simple.
I think there's music you like and you don't, and I think it's a personal thing rather than a,
I completely
a broad
agree.
brush.
I completely agree.
Look, my experience of sort of amateur psychoanalyzing these things, I probably think deep down he probably was. I think he was possibly too proud a man to just let you know, I would have thought. That's what I would take from it, but obviously I didn't know your father. So, sorry.
You're so right. I mean, we did have quarrels, actually, massive quarrels. And because he was a very intellectual man, he was very bright, he could attack me from a musical point of view. So when he heard Louis Armstrong, who was one of my favorite trumpet players, he said, you realize that man can't hold a long note on the trumpet to save his life. And I wasn't sufficiently equipped to say, but Louis preferred to play with this wonderful emotional vibrato. And when I got to know Billie Holiday, the singer, he said, I don't know how you can listen to that appalling American singer, and I didn't know enough. So occasionally we even went for each other at the breakfast table. It was sort of, like that. So it was, and I'm very sorry for that now, actually. My father and I'd like to meet him again and put it right.
I'm sure you will one day, Digby.
Who knows?
So look, you and I have chatted many times over a pint or two in the pub.
Indeed. And will do in the future.
I'm sure we will, yeah. And it's always been fascinating to me to listen to so many stories you've got to tell about your then, once you got into your professional musical career and you were earning a living out of it.
You're very patient.
So, what sort of stories can you share with us, mindful that we need to be able to broadcast it and not get sued by anyone? But it's okay to name drop as many times as you like.
Well, I don't know how many of the names I'd like to drop would mean much to people these days, because it's a long time ago. But, one of the things that I do remember, which was significant, is once again my dear friend Alex Welsh, whose picture is over there in the department. And Alex rang me one Friday when I was still stamping records, in the record library. And he said, what are you doing tomorrow, lad? And I said, nothing, Mr. Welsh, He said, oh, yes, you are. You're playing with me at the Queen Elizabeth Hall on the South Bank. And you're going to be my featured guest, along with, who was there? Diz Disley, our local tap dancer, Willie Gaines, and a great tenor player called Danny Moss. He didn't have to do that for me. Alex was a great cornet player. But he said, now it's time to introduce this young lad. Well, I walked out onto the Queen Elizabeth Hall stage and I got a round of applause and I played pretty well. And that was a great thrill moment, a great thrill moment. Another one, later on I had a band called Velvet, which is an awful name for a band. But it was two guitars. Basically, Velvet was the trio of Stefan Grappelli, the star French violinist who was superbly famous worldwide. And they had a disagreement with Seven, I think over money or something. So they said, we're leaving. So they left. And Len Skeet, the bass player, had heard about me, and he said, there's quite a good trumpet player around the place. So he brought me in, and we had 4 years touring with the Velvet. Terrible name, isn't it? I mean, honestly.
Well, a name of its time, I guess. I don't know. I mean,
Well, it was two guitars and bass, so it was rather like smooth jazz in a way,
yeah.
but it was very nice. But Velvet, yeah, I had a cornet playing pal called Richard Sudhalter, who was very good, American. He came over to England a lot. And when I said, I've got a group called Velvet, he said, why don't you get 2 banjos and a tuba and call it Horsehair? So
it could have been worse.
it could have, yes, it could have been, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, there's so many stories.
And was you just sort of touring around the UK, or did you ever go into Europe?
We did. We played the Philippines,
Yeah.
For the British Council, because in those days the British Council used to send people like Humphrey Lyttelton over to do what basically were goodwill tours, you know. And Humphrey wrote a great book about his tours in all sorts of places called What No Beethoven, because somebody had come up to him and said, aren't you playing any Beethoven tonight? And Humphrey said, nope. Yeah, we did the Philippines, which was nice and very lovely. And we stayed in a hotel called the Mandarin,
All right, yeah.
which is in the Philippines, and it's a bit like London's Savoy. So they provided absolutely everything for us. And the only thing we had to compete with was the house band in the hotel, who were fantastic. So, you know, this wonderful band playing socks off, you know. And now we have Velvet, and somebody went, you know, and we went on, played our little thing.
Very good.
Oh, we had a lot of stories.
You then obviously went on to other bands, and you were in the Pizza Express All Stars.
Yes, I did that for 3 years. Yes, I did that. In fact, I suppose over the years, I did a lot of different things. When I was at my best, I played with a band that played Charlie Mingus music, which is quite modern and quite challenging. I did Tony Miller's Mingus music. I did Brian Priestley's Septet, which was contemporary. But I always tended to come back to the music they called Dixieland.
So after Velvet, you went on to other bands. So tell us a bit more about, well, all of those really.
Well, I did, yes. I'd had 3 or 4 years with the Velvet, and by that time I'd learned what I wanted to do with my life, because up till then I was besieged, well, not besieged, but I was very often invited to do other things. And at one point I thought, wait a minute, if you're playing other people's music, then you're not doing what you want to do. So I thought it would be a good idea to start focusing on projects I had. And they sort of centered round a large circle of musicians that I loved, really loved, and adored, actually. Many of whom had come out of the Alex Welsh band, John Barnes, Roy Williams. And as well as that, some of the vintage musicians that I knew before the war, which of course include, well, I didn't know them before the war, but they were famous before the war. That was people like Nat Ganella, Tiny Winters, the great double bass player, and other people like that. So I kind of moved into the area of thinking, I really want to do this. I want this band or that idea, or some project that meant a lot to me. So rather than taking the very kindly invitations of people who said, oh, we kind of like the way you play, and would you like to do this? Which included Velvet, which was actually based on a very fine band called the Braff Barnes Quartet back in America. So I really focused in on things that I wanted to do, and that was what, from then on, that was more or less it.
Great. So, and at the beginning we listed all of your immense achievements, you know, both musically and from awards and everything else. You've written many books, you've produced and sold many albums. I mean, is there a particular favourite album that you did, and is there a particular favourite book?
Oh yeah, there is. The favourite album actually is with my friend Stan Barker. Now Stan was a pianist from Clitheroe in Lancashire, so he wasn't necessarily a national name, but he was a great player. And from 79 to 89 about, we formed a thing called Jazz College, which was a non-profit making organisation, which was concerned to bring improvisation into the schoolroom. We thought that was a good idea at the time. And I worked with Stan Barker for about 10 years, and we produced my best recordings, definitely, just trumpet and piano. And Stan was, sadly he died in 1995, he was the most marvellous partner, a great philanthropist, a wonderful educator, a terrific piano player by any standards, and my very, very good friend. And we made lots of recordings as a duo, which subsequently came out in a big double album on the New Orleans jazz, a label called Jazzology, which was owned by the late, I can't think of his name now, that's terrible, isn't it? Anyway, Jazzology is an American label. And the man who wrote it, who was George Buck, yeah, right. Kevin, your brother.
Probably related, because I'm from that part of the world.
Absolutely you are, yeah. And George wrote me a lovely letter when I wrote to him and said, this is my happiest work, well, work I still like best. You know, it was the best things I ever did. He wrote back a delightful letter and said, Dear Mr. Fairweather, I have 17 trumpet duo albums on my label. Most of them are by Ruby Braff, who was my idol. I have several others, all by extremely famous trumpet players with pianists. And so, as I've never heard of you, and I've never heard of Stan Barker, I don't know that I could issue these with any profit involved. So I thought, well, that's it. So I read the last line and it said, so how much do you want? So I wrote back to George Buck, and I said it was extremely gentlemanly of you to even think about this idea of putting my music out, but thank you so much for your generosity of spirit. And I said, of course, I wouldn't think of asking you for money. And a few weeks later, a check for $1,000 arrived for the rights, and he put out the album. Yeah, and it's called Something to Remember You By, which is more or less the way I'd like to be remembered. As far as books are concerned, gosh. And
just going back to that album, what sort of time would that have been? The 80s?
That was 1987 or 8, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The book that took me a long time, about 2.5 years, was called The Jazz the Essential Companion. And we took it upon ourselves, 3 men, Ian Carr, the trumpet player, Brian Priestley, the pianist and broadcaster, and myself, to do an A to Z of jazz. Very ambitious, actually, for this time. It took me a year, because I did basically the traditional mainstream people. Priestley did the bebop people, and Ian Carr did the contemporary people. And just writing up the cards, which meant going through every book I had and finding out every significant fact about these composers, musicians rather. Well, that took me well over a year. And then I thought, wait a minute, you may have got the details, but now you've got to write the entries. So that took another year at least. And when I thought I'd finished, because every night you'd think, oh, I've missed him out. But when I thought I'd finished, we went up to play at the BBC Jazz Society. And Lisa Lincoln, my partner at the time, said, you finished the book? By this time the manuscript was that high. And I said, yes, and we're going up to the BBC Jazz Society tonight, because I'm going to play, and we're going to take the manuscript because the house might burn down. And after that, it meant so much to me. So anyway, the book survived, first as the Jazz, the Essential Companion, and then as the Rough Guide to Jazz. And it's not bad. In fact, I think Alan Shipton, in one of his books, was one of the people who was kind enough to say that it was a pretty fair attempt by 3 men to cover the whole span of American and British jazz. And I still look at it and think, not a bad try.
Mm. But of course you are working on another book at the moment, aren't you?
At the moment, yes, I am. I have an autobiography. There's been 2 previous editions which were done by my great friends Anne and Roger Cottrell at Northway Publications, but basically the manuscript I've submitted to them was about 4 or 5 times longer, and they, I think really you could say, cherry-picked the bits that they thought were most important. My book is very long. It is actually an autobiography rather than just a set of jazz tales.
Well, that's what I mean. So this is the autobiography that Digby Fairweather wants to produce rather than what the publisher wants to produce.
I'd love it. I'd love it. I mean, if it happened, it would be a very detailed story of my life. But along with all the other aspects, there are many wonderful stories, I think, about people, for me, who were unique members of society. You know, jazz musicians are very unusual people. Mm. And the other day, Kevin, somebody said to me, somebody should write down all the stories about British jazz and put them in a compendium. And I haven't done that, but I have got a lot of stories about great people, I think, in our society. At one point, people like Brian Lemon, the pianist. Oh, Alex Welsh, of course. A lot of the favoured musicians that I was lucky enough to work with.
Very good. So we've listed many of the achievements that you've achieved over your life, Digby. Not least founding the National Jazz Archive in Loughton,
yes,
and the Jazz Centre UK, which we're in here today.
Yes, so we are.
So is asking which one is your favourite a bit like asking which one's your favourite child? Because they do different things, don't they? They do different things.
Well, you're absolutely right, Kevin, yeah. I mean, after the 1986 disaster, when, I think £3 million worth of public funding were lost by a very naughty man who isn't with us anymore, so I won't name him anyway. But the idea of the National Jazz Centre in Floral Street, Covent Garden, was basically to set up a centre which combined a research library with a performance centre, a place for people to exchange ideas, and hopefully a lobbying centre for the art of jazz, which by 1986 was, 23 years into the encroaching rock boom, you know, so we needed a centre. That went wrong, and as I'd been the I've been invited to advise on the library provision for jazz students or young people coming into the profession. I started the National Jazz Archive as a research centre in 1987, and it opened the following year, and it's still going strong, I think. I keep a friendly eye on it because I'm no longer a trustee, but it is very, very special to me.
It's been, it's still going strong, and I've been there, I've seen it. I mean, as an archive facility, it's quite, impressive to go in and see. There's a huge amount of material in there.
Yeah.
I think, well, the one thing I've observed with all of these, and like some of the stuff we have here, that there's always the difference between what has a monetary value, but what has a sort of heritage value.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes there may not be a huge amount of monetary value in some of this equipment and films and photos, but there is a huge heritage value to it.
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was way back, when I was a youngster, I qualified as a librarian. And one of the things that I wanted to do very much was to study the heritage of librarianship. So I used to go to the Library Association, which was in Ridgemount Street, and I could sink myself for a while into the heritage of why public libraries were born and how they developed. And it occurred to me that if a young musician had jumped into the wild waters of jazz, where you get no money if you don't play, we don't get any kind of annual increment, you don't get paid holidays. It's a wild it's a wild place to live, And I thought, well, if I was a young musician and concerned about where I was going, being able to study the heritage of the music, as I did at the Library Association, might be a useful thing.
Yeah,
perhaps.
Indeed, and that's one of the great things we do down here now.
Oh, yeah.
The Jazz Centre UK, which you also founded in 2016.
Yes.
Well, officially recorded as a charity in 2016. And of course,
right.
we're open to the public Wednesdays to Sundays.
We are indeed.
And we started in a little office in the corner over there.
Just back outside of the camera.
And now we occupy the whole basement floor of the Beecroft Art Gallery in Southend, and it's grown enormously in its popularity and, its acknowledgement as a cultural centre for jazz.
Yeah, our first ever.
Our first ever, and still really the only.
The only, that's true too.
It's the only physical home of jazz that preserves, promotes, and
absolutely, and celebrates
jazz.
Yeah.
So
I think this is incredibly important too. I mean, ideally, I suppose in my dreams, I'd like to see both facilities, research and celebration, under one roof. That's in the future.
It may come one day, and I think we all share that vision, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So I think it's finding whether this or wherever, finding a space where that could possibly happen, under the right circumstances.
Oh, sure.
I think we all share that same vision.
When you think, Kevin, that we're talking in 2026. Well, if you went back 1 year, there is a marvellous book which actually catalogues and recounts the story of jazz in Britain from 1875 until 1930. I should remember the name of the authoress. She's a brilliant woman. Catherine Parsonage is her name. And the story is Jazz in Britain, 1875 to 1930. Well, as we're now in 2026, we can honourably say that jazz has been flourishing in our country for 150 years. And yet it's never had a centre like this.
No, and that kind of brings me on to the next question then, really, Digby, which is that, and I think you've identified that jazz, once rock and roll came along and Elvis and the Beatles came along, that kind of just really put jazz on the back foot. And but I do think it seems to be having a bit of a revival. There seems to be a greater interest in jazz again. Certainly, the younger generation seem to be a bit more interested in it. I know there was a recent parliamentary report that showed that 30 to 40% of youngsters have some sort of interest in jazz now. So
I didn't know that, but that's good to know.
Yeah. So and of course we, as we've grown, we're now getting more involved in education. At a younger level, we're getting into schools. We have the Let's Improvise project, which has been very successful.
Very successful last year.
Where we have schools come in and, you know, the children, you know, learn all about jazz and stuff.
Oh,
So,
yes.
So what sort of, whether one thing, what would you like to see really from the Jazz Centre? What's the next big project that you think you would like the Jazz Centre to do?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, again, in my dreams, actually, I would love to see both facilities, the Jazz Centre UK, which, as you say, is a multifunctional area. It's concerned with performance, it's concerned with preservation, celebration, as we said, and a place where, using jazz technology, terminology, you can hang out. You can come down, you can look at Louis Armstrong's trumpet, you can look at our massive historic vinyl collections, you can buy albums. It's a place to come and have fun, I think, as much as anything, you know, as well as to learn. And I think with regard to your other point, when I was a kid, if you wanted to be a jazz musician, which was not very well liked, you know, I mean, a jazz musician, don't they take drugs? And don't they smoke pot and all that? Which of course was not true. But back in those days, you learned your craft by playing in nightclubs or with dance bands. Nowadays, which is immensely different, makes a huge point to what you've already discussed, is that there are at least 4 major music outlets in London, like Trinity College, the Royal Academy, and they all have full-time jazz courses. So there's no reason why a person can't leave their youth jazz orchestra in whatever county they are and go straight to the Royal Academy and learn the ins and outs of being a jazz musician. So there's a formalized educational structure already in place. And of course that explains why I come down here sometimes and I shake hands with somebody who's probably 20 and I said, terrific playing, you know. Yeah, well, you know, he'll say, I've just come out of the academy and you listen to me, which is what I do.
Indeed. Well, look, I mean, you've rattled off over the course of our conversation some fantastic names from the past. Some of them with us, some of them sadly no longer with us.
Yeah, too.
But what I've certainly observed over the last few years and attending the jazz club on a Thursday evening is that we still have some fantastic current jazz musicians, you know, and you've been very fortunate to play with many of them. I mean, we're going to see the Jive Aces, which are hugely entertaining, but we have Simon Spillett that comes down to the centre as well as to your jazz club.
Alan Skidmore, one of the veterans.
I mean, you know, just tell us a bit about some of those. Tell us whatever stories you can about those, you know, and you know, your sort of earliest interactions with some of them and where they are today.
Right. Well, I think I've probably told you about the great moment in 1971 when I finally decided that after playing with local dance bands and playing avant-garde jazz with my good friend Trevor Taylor and all those things, I thought, okay, Dig, it's probably time to do what you want to do, which wasn't very fashionable. So I don't know whether we spoke about this earlier, but I formed a little 6-piece Dixieland band and wrote for it very hard and rehearsed it very hard. And we got to play at what was then London's home of traditional jazz at 100 Oxford Street. The sign's over there, by the way. And my band, I was the fill-up band, you know, the support band. And the main band was Alex Welsh. And Alex, who was a dear, dear man and a great, great friend of mine, when we played at this shrine, you know, 100 Oxford Street to traditional jazz, we had, I think, a pretty fair night. And Alex, who was the leader of the greatest band, for me, anywhere in Britain, it was a Dixieland swing band. He came over, arms out. I like your playing. I've met you. We'd met before briefly. He said, but now I know how you play. I'm going to help you, and he did. And I think that was one of the big things that happened for me. Alex called me about a year later, I think, and said, "What are you doing tomorrow night?" dig, and I said, I'm not doing anything, Mr. Welsh, you know. He said, yes, you are. You're playing at the Queen Elizabeth Hall on the South Bank as my guest with other members of what he called the Alex Welsh family. Well, that was like being asked to join the Beatles. You know, I polished up my horn, polished my shoes, spent the whole day in a ferment of excitement, and went up to this marvellous great concert hall in London on the South Bank. And Alex said, good to see you. You're on in 10 minutes with my band. And I had a lucky night and played well. And that was really the start, I think. So that was a big relationship. And much terminated much too early when Alec died at, I think, only 52.
I'm quite young.
Very young, yeah. He was a very good and serious musician, trumpet player, like cornet player like me. But he had the job of being a band leader long before the days of email and all the things that make life easier. So I have on my wall actually still a copy of a letter he wrote around that time, 71, I think. You know, dear Mr. Smith, we will be delighted to come and play for you at the sum of £200 or something. You know, yours sincerely, Alex Welsh. He had no secretary, and he often said to me later on, I don't feel much like a trumpet player, Digby. All I wanted to do was play at the jazz band ball, but I spend most of my time being an administrator. And that sent him, unfortunately, amongst other things, to a bottle of vodka.
All right.
And that did for him too early, but I miss him a lot. That was one big thing.
The natural insecurities, I think, of highly talented people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. And absolutely. And also the duties of being a band leader, which means that you have all kinds of administration to deal with. You have to be the front man. You do all the work. All the musicians have only to turn up and play, you know. And that's difficult. So Alex was one. My good friend Dave Shepherd, who was a brilliant clarinet player, became another very close friend. He was called Britain's Benny Goodman because he played a lot like the King of Swing, Benny Goodman in the States. And I got to know Dave very well indeed. We did loads of things for years. We headed, well, he played in the Great British Jazz Band. We had a sextet which broadcast, with lots of broadcasting in those days, all the time, you know. Because although the Beatles were omnipotent and changing the culture, if you want to call it the backwash of people who had been there a year or two previously was still pretty young. You know, the Beatles were in their early 20s. Some of the people I was working with were only in their late 20s. So they were flourishing, you know.
Yeah.
And every week, because the programming at the BBC took a long time to adjust to what they call turntable policy now, where they just play rock music. In those days, they'd ring up and say, oh, you got band parade on Friday night, do you want to come and do 2 sets? And we'd toddle up there with our horns, play 2 sets and get paid.
Very good. So, obviously, as a very successful musician yourself that's had a wonderful career, and you've met many people as you've listed, is there one person that you idolised that you eventually got to work with that you can sort of
It's
mention?
a good question. There's been so many actually over the years. Affectionately, I would probably go back to Alex. And it's because in one evening at the 100 Club, he turned me from a little local band leader playing in Essex with a bunch of semi-professional chums. He jettisoned me into this huge society of first-class professional world-class musicians. And that was a great, great thing. Some of the other ones, gosh. Well, I think I'm fairly good at making friends. So over the years, whenever anybody has come to the Jazz Centre in recent years, we get to know them. Some of them are veterans like Alan Barnes or Simon Spillett, who's rapidly becoming a hugely successful veteran as an author and a tenor player. And then next week somebody else, and you say, wow, that's great playing, And I'm intensely pleased that because of the educational system that's arisen in London and all around the UK, at Leeds and Newcastle, there are hundreds and hundreds of young jazz musicians. And I think the only problem that I have with that is that there's never been an official circuit. If you're a very good classical violinist, you can probably find a chair in the LSO, a residence chair, right? Somebody from the Royal Academy, who's a brilliant player, could come out of the academy at the end of their 4 years, and somebody could say, do you want to come and play at the pub next week for £20? So there is no professional circuit to support these brilliant young people. We have one little jazz clubs we have here, of course, which is wonderful, but we could do with rather more in the way I think of a circuit, and perhaps a little more in the recognition of prestige for musicians. I don't see that many musicians being automatically listed in the honours lists. I don't see them really. A lot of us are still, in a sense, travelling gypsies. We can go and say, yes, tonight we're playing at the Jazz Centre, which is great. Tomorrow we might be in the St Swithin's Arms in Heathcote or somewhere, I don't know, So it's what I still term something of a cottage industry.
I think, yeah, I mean, that may be true to some, although the problems you've described may transcend all music genres to some degree. I'm sure if you spoke to any musician, I think it's music in general, that.
Oh, I think so, yes, absolutely. One of my friends, for anybody who's seen the Titanic, he's one of the violinists on board as the ship goes down.
Oh, right.
Yeah, a little tiny bit of immortality.
In the film, of course.
In the film, yes. But I do know that he still waits for the phone to ring as a classical performer,
Yeah.
And such little details are part of our grist and mill, I think.
Yeah, okay. And we've talked about the various things you did over your life. Obviously, you had a period at the BBC where you was a broadcaster. You had your own radio show and everything else.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, is there, what can you tell us about your experience there? How you enjoyed it? And
well, I loved it. I mean, the way it happened was one of my musician friends also worked for BFBS, which is British Forces Broadcasting.
Yeah.
And he said, I think you might have a chance. See what we can do. And he gave me a voice test, and he put me on I must say, a very unsuccessful series called Young Music, which lasted for 6 weeks, I think. But after that, Keith Stewart, who was a veteran jazz broadcaster and producer, I should say, got hold of me and said, yeah, you can do something. You can do some work for me as a presenter, and also occasionally substitute for Humphrey Lyttelton, who was a veteran, beautiful broadcaster on the Best of Jazz. And then after my great friend Peter Clayton, who was another great jazz broadcaster, who a lot of people will remember in 2026, Peter started to get ill, and I gradually started to sub for him more and more. And from I did a lot for Jazz FM, I did a lot for BFBS, I did a lot for World Service. And from 1992 to 1998, I did a weekly, 5 shows a week, doing a show called Jazz, what was it? It was Radio 2, and it was first Jazz Parade, and then it was Jazz Notes, and I did all that. And that was fun. What I did discover was that when you broadcast, you make a lot more money than you do when you play, which was very nice. So when I finally quit the BBC in 1998, I dropped £30,000 a year in income.
Yeah, right. Quite, yeah.
Ouch. Ouch.
Indeed.
But by that time, of course, I'd formed my band again and was back to playing the circuit, which was fun.
Yeah, good. Okay, and again, we've talked about jazz having a revival,
yes.
and I think it is. And I think, look, my own amateur analysis of it is a bit like you look at the journey of classical music and everything else. It went, it was the most popular music. Then it sort of wasn't the most popular music because other stuff come back. But now it's a sort of respected genre of music in its own right. And, and I think, again, from my amateur analysis, I think that's probably where jazz is. I think, jazz came along, it was the most popular music. Rock and roll came along, nearly killed it. But I think it's now coming out of that trough and going on. So, I mean, what do you think that is? Why do you think jazz is coming back?
Good question. I think pop music or rock and roll, it has its centerpieces and stallions. People like Cliff Richard, obviously, is wonderful. McCartney continues to be busy. But the creative spark, I think, has gone out of rock and roll somewhat. It was there in the 70s, 60s and 70s, certainly, with people like, Pink Floyd is one example. And there are lots and lots of others. But I think now the boy bands and the very bizarre things, they're trying very hard, but they don't have the same necessary creative appeal. I mean, when the Beatles came along, I'd been into jazz for, 14 or 15 years. Then they came along in 63 with their 3 big hits, which was Please Please Me, She Loves You, and From Me to You. And I remember very well thinking, gosh, this is new. How am I going to cope with this? Because I'd been brought up on Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, all those people. And I thought, this is different, and it's potentially worrying. And I think it was very worrying for a long time. A lot of musicians, which we have displayed around here, had to go into jazz rock, and I think the power of jazz was definitely undermined. A lot of the biggest jazz stars, including people again that we have here like John Dankworth and Cleo Lane, who were international superstars, nonetheless they ended up recording later on their own labels rather than on a major like Columbia. And yes, we had a tough time. But these days, I think jazz has almost got to a point where it's a matter of rediscovery. Young people are coming along and saying, wait a minute, this might not be what I hear on 101 different pop stations, because there are loads of those. But they say, no, we're interested in something that's got something better.
Well, again, my amateur analysis of this is, being obviously a rock and roll and Pink Floyd fan as well, is I think with jazz, everyone, if nobody has really discovered or listened to jazz, you can have a preconception about what you might have heard, but that may not have been your genre of jazz. I mean, as I've found out, jazz has so many different elements to it. That you can definitely find something that you like. You can certainly find some stuff you don't like.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think it is that voyage of discovery for a lot of the youngsters, really, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we are very lucky in a way, in that we do have the national courses that guide people along. But there's a lot of people still, I know, who, and certainly when I was young and on the road all the time, or younger, I would be talking to somebody and they'd say, we'd talking, I'd say, what do you do? And he'd say, I'm a consultant physician or something. And I would say, well, I'm a jazz musician. And they say, oh, no, don't like jazz. And I can quite see why. Because after the Beatles, jazz got very resentful and went down a lot of intellectual byways and pathways, right into free improvisation, which is very hard to contend with for the average musical listener. I mean, I don't know how you feel, Kevin, but for me, for the average listener, a tune, a song words are all pretty important. You know, a theme.
I think it's, in my experience, it's just whatever catches your particular ear, and that was really the point I was making. You know,
Yeah.
I said, yes, I like rock and roll, but
Yeah.
there's an awful lot of it I don't like. You
Yeah,
know, that
sure.
I wouldn't listen to. So I think you find a particular genre of that type of music that you like, or you know, as you said, you know,
Totally,
and I think
yes.
the same with jazz. You know, there will be,
Yeah.
you know, I've listened to a lot of jazz since I've met you and got involved with the Jazz Centre. I had some
In
jazz
a big
my
way.
I
Yes.
had some jazz in my collection previously, so I wasn't completely unknown to the jazz world. But again, that just proves the point that there is types of jazz I liked and I had in my collection, but there is lots of jazz I don't like. There's lots of rock and roll I like, but there's certainly a lot of rock and roll I didn't like. You
Absolutely
know?
right.
So
Yeah.
I think it's just you know, I think and the important thing that what we do here at the Jazz Centre is to be able to introduce people to whichever type of jazz it might be that they like, and they may have just listened to the wrong type of jazz to be turned off by it.
I think so, yeah. And I think you're absolutely right, as usual. And I think one of the occasional problems that we had in the past is that we try and embrace every aspect of jazz. So one day you might get wild, free, improvised jazz, which is going to go smacking over the heads of 99% of the people who listen to it. But on the other hand, you get other bands. I mean, I don't mind whether they're a Dixieland band or the Jive Aces, who are a very popular show band, or Simon Spiller's big band, which is a tremendously authentic and skilled big band.
Feel-good tunes and feel-good performances, aren't they?
Yeah,
You know,
they
you
are,
see
absolutely.
excellent songs, tunes, whatever you
Yeah.
want to call them. And you know, you mentioned the Jive Aces; they just make you feel good. You watch
They
them
do.
play, they entertain hugely. They play extremely well, and they just make you feel good when you watch them.
And they swing.
Yeah, they do.
You know, and that's part of it as well, you know. And I think, I think the more that people have available to listen, it's easier probably for them to say, oh yeah, no, I didn't like that, but I like that. So that helps them to focus a little bit, you know. And I mean, I have to. I mean, when I listen to the Spontaneous Music Ensemble, which is a splendid organization by the late John Stevens, which basically challenges all your thoughts. I think one of their albums was called So What Do You Think? And the idea was that it was just people would play whatever they wanted to, but try and relate to what the person next to them was playing and improvise something that related. And that, to be fair, is hard going.
It is. I guess the sales figures answered that question, though, did they? Or not?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you put it up against, I'm going to write a little later, going to rally to my local DJ, you know, I can quite understand why people would say, yeah, that's great. It's got a beat. It's got a great lyric. It's Chuck Berry playing guitar. It's danceable. It's got everything that, for example, your children's band has, you know, Rewind. Now, they're very good at making people dance and feel happy. And, you know, there is something that I do believe about jazz, which is that to some degree you are inviting people to go on an abstract intellectual journey with you. It can be accessible. I mean, if I pick up the trumpet and play like Harry James, then it's accessible, hopefully, and fun. There's a melody, there's a beat, there's those things. But some of the other performers, they almost say, can you get this? Slight intellectual challenge, you know, and we are going to instruct you into the wider areas of the music. And I think that is sometimes pretty hard gig. Let's put it basically where it is.
Yep, no, that's great. So we've talked about your life journey and, you know, through music and through jazz.
Yes, sir.
So is there any either particular or general advice that you would give to a 20-year-old Digby Fairweather that walks into the Jazz Centre today? What does the 80-year-old Digby Fairweather say to the 20-year-old Digby Fairweather?
Gosh, well, I think it would be, don't be afraid to like what you like. Always make sure that your musical convictions are the ones that you want. Don't be led astray by anything that doesn't appeal to you. Because if you do other people's music, and of course you're going to have a tremendous fun doing other people's music, which is fine. But in the end, if you become slave to other people's wishes, you will never be the best. If you go for what you love, which I suppose in my case was basically traditional Dixieland jazz, then you stand a chance of setting your feet on the stage saying, this is why I'm here, this is what I want, and you will deliver of your best. I think that's a very important thing to remember.
Good, yeah, no, and I think that's very sage advice. Okay then, so is there anything else you'd like to add before I get to my final question, Digby? Anything you think you've missed, anything?
Apart from the fact I'm scared stiff for your final question, no, I think that you've been a marvellous interviewer, my dear friend Kevin.
Of you, Digby.
And we, as far as I'm aware, except if anybody wants to go to the details of, you know, the minuscule areas of my career, which some people might want to know, no, I think we have it covered.
Good. Well, I've had very good material to work with. So
Thank you.
Made the
That
job
goes
easy.
double.
Yeah, well, then just finally, Digby, the last question is, what would you like to see happen to continue the legacy that you've created here in preserving, promoting and celebrating jazz in all its forms?
How very kind. The answer is I'd like it to progress. I'd like us, from our very, very promising beginnings, I would like to see us become, and I think we will, a recognised national force with the Jazz Centre UK and hopefully the archive too. And I think we can do that because we are the first and we are the only people ever to have done this. And I think that's, you know, something to be pleased about. And I want to see us move on to the point where we can become a truly national voice for and representation of the music we love. That's my ultimate ambition.
I don't think we're far away from that, to be honest with you. So
I agree with you.
I think we're getting there. Well, look, Digby, it's been an enormous privilege and a pleasure for me to get to know you.
Thank you.
To call you a
Friend?
dear friend.
Absolutely.
To capture so many moments from your career and your life in jazz. And I'm certain I speak on behalf of all in jazz when I say thank you for all you've done for jazz.
Oh, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure in every respect.
Thank you.
I call my baby